Hello, our users, Shiny enthusiasts around the world. Thank you so much for joining us for our last installment of the 2019 Shiny Developer Series. We have had a lot of great insights, great deep dives into a lot of the awesome community efforts, and today will certainly be no different. I always want to extend my thanks to Curtis Kephart from our studio for being generous to host us for these great webinars. And I'm very excited to talk about the Yonder package with our featured guest for today, Nathan Teetor. So Nathan, thank you again so much for being part of our webinar today. And if you don't mind, if you want to share with us a little bit about your background, how you got started using R, and also how you got started with Shiny.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, and thank you to all of you for tuning in either live or for catching the recording. My name is Nathan Teetor. I'm a software engineer at ZevRoss Spatial Analysis. I've been using R for 6 years now, and my background is in computer science. Previously, I've worked in the financial sector and also at the Harvard School of Public Health. I'm the author of the Zealot package, which provides a multiple and destructuring assignment operator for R users. I presented that package at the 2018 RStudio conference. And I'm also the author of the Yonder package, which we're going to hear more about over the next 40 to 50 minutes.
Absolutely. And yeah, let's not waste much time. Let's get into it. And I'll mention that, yeah, when I first got familiar with you and your work, it was from that same presentation about the Zealot package. Really well done. And I highly recommend those interested to check out the recording from that presentation. But yes, it was shortly thereafter that I saw Yonder come through on GitHub. And admittedly, when I first saw it, I was kind of blown away at what looks like a very ambitious undertaking, and would love to hear you walk us through kind of your motivations to take, again, what seems like a very intense or massive undertaking to generate this, and what are some of the problems or motivation for what Yonder is trying to solve?
Sure. So I was fortunate enough to start using R shortly after Shiny was first released, and was immediately struck by how easy it was to get a useful web tool up and running with Shiny. And Shiny, if you think about Shiny as a vehicle, it really was the first of its type on the lot. And so it opened up new ways for our users to develop. I mean, well, not new ways. It revolutionized how our users could build web applications. And so our users now were driving distances they previously hadn't been able to go. And over the years, I think many people agree with my sentiment about how useful or how sort of nice it is to build applications with Shiny, because we saw the R development community really build out Shiny, adding options and features, and where we could drive our Shiny vehicle, that we pushed that further and further and further. And as I came to use Shiny more and more, I began to wonder if could we think of Shiny not only as a vehicle, but also as an engine, and could we develop another vehicle to run on that Shiny engine? And that other vehicle is Yonder. So when I talk about a Yonder application, I'm misspeaking, because Yonder builds Shiny applications. We are going the same places you go with Shiny. The difference is we're getting there. We're going about it a little differently. The same way that if you're in your Ford pickup and you're driving somewhere, you can probably get to all the same places as your Ford Mustang, but the experience is a little different. And I also want to highlight, before I permanently park this metaphor, I want to highlight that the same way getting out of your Ford pickup and into your Ford Mustang you're gonna sit in the Mustang, and you'll probably be able to turn on the car, start driving, start taking yourself places, but you might not be immediately familiar with the dashboard with all the features. And in that same way, I would expect Shiny users, it's unfortunately not a one-to-one Shiny to Yonder, but when you pick up Yonder, you're going to see a lot of familiarities. You're going to see a lot of, over time, a lot of new features to help you build, I think, more expressive Shiny applications. So my hope today is to convince you that the learning curve for picking up Yonder is well worth it, and I hope you'll give Yonder a shot.
Well, I'm very glad to hear this because in fact, when I first came across Yonder, I'll be fully transparent, it did almost seem like a re-engineering. And that's, again, like you pointed out so clearly, that's not the case here. You are building on top of the core engine of Shiny. And like you said, we're just taking a slightly different route to get to some of the places that you might get to otherwise. And yeah, we're going to get real geeky here and get into some of the nuts and bolts of Yonder. And I want to emphasize to those listeners that if you have questions during the webinar, feel free to send those in the chat panel and the question panel, and we'll be glad to answer them as we go along. So yeah, Nathan, let's dive into some of what Yonder is about. And I know you've been gearing up for a new release that's happening. So I'd be very interested to just get a walk through some of your favorite features and kind of the typical workflow of making a Yonder app.
Sure, and I think you brought up something that's important to note. So the Shiny has an ecosystem now, and because Yonder builds Shiny applications, it's meant to interface with that same ecosystem. So the one caveat is Yonder, a sort of a motivation and a feature for building Yonder was using the latest version of the Bootstrap library, and that is the CSS and the JavaScript behind Shiny. And so if a package, a Shiny package, requires Bootstrap 3, that is where you as a user may run into some issues with Yonder, because it's a bad idea to load both Bootstrap 3 and Bootstrap 4. So that's something to be aware of. But otherwise, if you find one of the packages you know and love that interfaces with Shiny and it doesn't interface with Yonder, that's on me. So don't feel so. By all means, come right over here and click on that issues button and let me know that some sort of expectation is not being met, because, as I said, we're still building Shiny applications. And so with that, I'll jump into a first sort of highlight a feature, and that is Yonder comes with a lot of new reactive inputs, and a motivation or something that I wanted to do when building Yonder was learn as much as I could from feature requests from under the Shiny repository, the Shiny GitHub repository, because many people have offered up great ideas for where Shiny could go, and only some of those have been really brought to life. And that was pivotal in development of Yonder, because all of a sudden I could see what people wanted to get out of a Shiny application that they couldn't necessarily get already. And a problem that I see a surprising amount of people asking on Stack Overflow, on our studio, the community site. That's a question of, during the lifetime of my application, I need to generate a dynamic set of buttons. Perhaps the user is uploading a data set, and based on some attributes of that data set, I need to create maybe two to six buttons. Mm-hmm. So how can I go about doing that? How can I set up observers? Do you use a for loop for observers? Do I need an lapply? It's an lapply, and we won't get into that more. But a new input from Yonder actually helps sort of resolve this problem entirely, and that is the button group input. And you can see it right here. It's this bar, and each of these is a button. And for example, in this example, we're using some fixed data sets. As I mentioned, it's probably more likely that we're working with uploaded data or perhaps data pulled from systems. So we don't necessarily know exactly what's going to be in that data set. But because this button group input is a single reactive input, we know during the lifetime of our application where those values are going to be because there is a single reactive ID. We no longer have to worry about storing storing reactive IDs in variables. We no longer have to worry about dynamically generating observers during the runtime of our application. And it's also going to be much easier for a collaborator to come on later and look at the code and say, and just understand what's going on. Because even if you can get around to understanding a loop or an apply function, it's not as intuitive as having all the observers written out ahead of time, which we can do because we know the ID from the get-go. So what's happening here is we're picking a data set, and then the choices and values are based on the column names of this data set. And so a button group input operates, or the value changes when the user clicks on one of the buttons in the button group. So again, this Yonder was not meant to, boy, I feel like I'm going to throw myself under the bus with this one, revolutionize Shiny applications. It was meant to make life a little bit easier, streamline applications so that we can focus on, say, the design of an application, making sure that an application is the users can understand what's going on in an application. Make sure that if you need, for example, to make sure that your web applications are accessible to screen readers and other accessibility technologies, we don't have to worry so much about the ins and outs of the server logic of, how do I go about changing, how do I go about making this blue, for example? Well, with Yonder, it's one function call. You say, okay, take my button group, change the background to, in this case, the primary theme, which is a value from Bootstrap. So we're trying to just sort of cut corners where we can in order to get to the actual meat or the problems of our application. Because Shiny developers have an extra layer of complexity in that the R code they're writing is not just, you're putting it out there in the wild. And so you're really exposing yourself to a lot of new potential problems. And my hope for Yonder is to save you as much trouble as possible when developing those applications.
So there's definitely a theme there I want to hit on too that I think was really well said. And first of all, definitely don't sell yourself short. I think having these convenient inputs that give me more mental energy to concentrate on some of the harder design problems and not have to worry about, oh no, I mismatched that ID or I forgot that ID or oh no, I have all these 10 observers and have to link them all together. Now, of course, I'm a bit biased here. I've been doing this for a while, so I kind of know my way around it. But let's be honest, for somebody that's kind of already done Shiny a little bit and now they're starting to get into situations where they have to design something a little more complex, having tools like the frameworks that Yonder has, I think could be very valuable to make sure they can attack the real design problems at hand and making sure that their app
Mm-hmm.
is doing what it is intended to do and freeing their mental energy to concentrate on those. So yeah, I know from my standpoint, there are a lot of packages I do consider revolutionary, and then yet the package authors say, no, I just added this to make a little life easier for me, and hopefully other people like it. I mean, they're all important here. So I could definitely see a lot of value in having this kind of dynamic interface where again there's one source of truth almost and where I have to modify
Yeah,
things
yes.
instead of maybe if you have a data set of like 200 variables who's going to want to do that. So yeah, this will be very helpful, great utility here.
And I guess we can jump into a second feature then, and this is another, it touches on another reactive input, and this is a link input. And a link input functions very similarly to a button input, and a button input functions exactly like a action button in Shiny. I had, as sort of in the development of Yonder, I tried to smooth out some naming consistencies, some argument consistencies. So across the board, all reactive inputs have a core set of arguments, which is ID, the reactive ID of the input, choices, values, and selected. And this actually, this really helps me in prototyping, because if I choose one reactive input, say a select input, and then I decide, you know what, let's try a button group. I can, for the most part, just drop select input and put in button group input, and I don't need to worry, do I need to change argument names? It just runs. But the link input here has an interesting feature, and that is you can stretch a link input, and that is not there's nothing physical about that. It's still the same link input, but what does happen is that clicking on the parent element causes a click on the link itself. So you notice that here I'm hovering over this card, and it's as though I'm hovering over the link. You see, you'll see the underline appear. Mm-hmm. And I use this feature a lot. And this is a very simplified example of this, but when building an application that is, say, a data explorer, often you want to create a landing page that sort of highlights, okay, here are the possible data sets, and here are some descriptions for those data sets. And then right there with the description is a way for the user to proceed through the application to the actual data exploration page. And with these stretched link inputs, we can set up kind of this landing page with these three highlights. So for example, if we wanted to go to data set 2, click on that page, or excuse me, click on that card, and we're off to page 2. We can go back to the home. We could try, so in this case, we can click on 3, and that'll take us to 3, or we could go to 1, and we can go to 1. And this is, so this is both set up in the UI, the link input and the stretching, that's a reactive input, so you're gonna set that up in your UI. And the rest of this is set up in the observer, or sorry, in the server. And I also want to highlight a component here that's it's sort of working behind the scenes. You can't quite see it, except that you'll notice this transition, it doesn't feature any sort of tab or nav pane. And that is in Yonder, I made a conscious decision to separate the tabs or the navigation input from the actual panes of content themselves. And that's panes as in window, not as in ow, 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 moving from Shiny to Yonder causes me a lot of pain. So
yeah, we don't want to hurt people with this migration, right? Yeah,
it's a painless process. It's all it requires is a little installation from CRAN or GitHub.
Yep.
And so these panes of content you can switch between them with any reactive input, or any reactive for that matter. What's happening on the server side is that the reactive value changes, and an observer says, oh, okay, switch to the pane of content you want to see. So in this case, I'm saying, all right, link input 1 is clicked, and then show the first pane of content. Similarly, this home button, that's what we're looking at here. This is one of our nav panes. And I made this sort of decoupling of the content itself from the input that's toggling it, so that there's a lot more flexibility when building a Shiny application. For anyone, I think most Shiny users are pretty aware, or Shiny developers, sorry, are pretty aware that a Shiny application lives in a single web page. So we kind of need to get a little creative about how we piece together a complex or detailed application and how we allow the user to navigate through our applications.
Yeah, this is interesting, and it's something that I've been trying to get my head around is the fact that I'll have fairly complex app workflows in these apps where maybe it's kind of a linear structure and how they go from like upload to process to stat modeling to visualization. And there are other times you can kind of maybe go in different stages and you don't really necessarily have to start in one. But yeah, it's always had a bit of tension in how I walk a user through kind of the workflow of this. And it does seem like you could construct this in such a way where you could walk them through logically without them being overwhelmed with a bunch of navigation choices or something to that effect. It sounds like, yeah, you're given another avenue to kind of lead them through a logical construction of your app's workflow. Am I
Mm-hmm.
understanding that correctly?
Yeah, and it's you're giving yourself room to think about how best to walk your user through the application, because um, tabs or pills, sort of the nav pills, nav tabs, may work in 80% of cases, but maybe you have a you want to walk a user through a multi-step form, and then maybe what you're hoping for is that there's a next button in the bottom right corner of each form window, and so you could sort of incrementally step your user through with with this nav content component. And so it's just Yonder wants to let you be as creative as you can be, um, and 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 uh, and I would also love feedback on the ways you the developer are being creative with Yonder. I think when I talk about the challenges of developing Yonder, um, one of the biggest challenges was actually sort of developing in a bit of an echo chamber. I, I I use Yonder in my work, and over the last year have really pushed myself to use Yonder in new and creative ways to see what I thought maybe 2 years ago I thought was, oh, this is great, and then lo and behold, it's like, well, that's actually not as, we need to change it this way or change it this way, or that it's just hard to set up. So um, if you, the listener, have any interest in Yonder, please, I would ask, upload upload your example application to GitHub if you can, for example, or send me a link, or if for some reason the application you're trying to develop with Yonder doesn't work, you see a bug or something's not working as expected, please reach out to me. I'd be happy to talk with you about what it is you're trying to do with Yonder and the ways in which Yonder isn't quite meeting your expectations. And this will go a long way to developing Yonder, because as I said uh, previously, Yonder, I looked at a lot of GitHub issues and Stack Overflow comments, our Studio community site comments. Just what were people asking for, or what were people asking about when it came to Shiny applications? And so, and I have the benefit of starting, or I'll say we have the benefit of starting from a clean slate. Shiny has done a great job of preserving backwards compatibility. So you don't wake up one morning and say, oh no, my Shiny app's not working when I upgraded. Uh, but that is also kind of, that you have to be very careful then. Yonder right now is young enough that we can make big changes. So if there are additions or ideas that you have for something like Yonder, please let's talk and see about maybe incorporating that idea into Yonder, because I'm really very hopeful for where this package can go.
Yeah, that's interesting thoughts, and it's not too dissimilar to the fact that, with respect to base R itself, that obviously
Mhm.
they have to maintain backward compatibility, like literally is one of the biggest priorities. So you might see, and I don't want to sound harsh here, some is more slower moving of radical new features, Whereas, like you said, with Yonder, you have been obviously the biggest user of it, since you've been using this in your own daily work. But it would be great to see what others in the community who may have only heard about it but haven't a chance to put it through like an evaluation of how it can help them, to see what
Hmm.
workflows that maybe you did not anticipate that they're trying to solve. And yeah, I think
Yes, exactly.
the whole spirit of this community, of this Shiny Developer Series, is to highlight what those in the Shiny community are doing. Maybe it starts as scratching their own itches, so to speak, but then we want to share this out there and give them as an alternative to look at for ways to streamline their workflows for however appropriate it happens to be for their projects. And even just this navigation feature, this is something that I'm going to seriously consider for some apps that I want to be more maybe opinionated or a little more friendly with the navigation of it. Whereas I don't want to
Hmm.
overwhelm them with too many choices right off the bat. So this is something I'm going to explore for sure. And obviously, this is only scratching the surface of what Yonder offers. So I'd be curious to hear your perspective on the sense that I've noticed that this feature, and among others, there you have a nice collection of these user interface enhancements and some nice tie-ins to the client server interactions. And I'm wondering what have been the features that have been most difficult to develop while you're maintaining this vision of Yonder that you've had since you started this.
Well, unfortunately, many of those difficult features are now sort of put to rest. They're in that great development farm up in upstate New York, and they've kind of they've been trimmed along the way. One of those, for example, was a table output. I actually developed a lightweight JavaScript library called Chabudai, and it was supposed to sort of take the Bootstrap table and create a plugin for it. And boy, let me tell you, creating a table library, there's a reason why there's sort of a select 3, 4, 5 that people just consistently go back to and use because woo, it's let me just say, developing Yonder, there were a lot of learning moments, a lot of it's like, maybe we won't do that. Uh, so this is, I, I guess, I mean, I often see people sort of, I don't know, saying, is package development for me? It's like, yes, it's like, absolutely. Like this, like I think this was some of the most challenging parts of Yonder were the most fun because when you are sitting down to grow a package, you you get to explore, you get to try out and make mistakes and hopefully learn from them. So let's see. So okay, so we got table output. That was difficult. Um, Outputs in general are tricky. At one point, there was a streaming output in Yonder, which was sort of a queue of alerts that would be sent from the server to the browser, and that came with a number of challenges. So that has been put to rest too. It's been sent to the nice farm. Um,
Oh, is that farm getting
and
bigger? Or
no, it it's very nice, and we treat it with a lot of respect, because those those features haven't that aren't here fully developed have definitely influenced other aspects of Yonder, because even if that is not the way we can get to destination X, then we need to figure out a new way to get to destination X. Um, Accessibility, accessibility was actually a big motivation for Yonder in the beginning.
Hmm.
And fortunately, the Bootstrap team has really taken on the web accessibility initiative. And so Bootstrap 4 does a good job of making sure your web applications are, again, accessible to technologies like screen readers. And I'll be the first to admit, there are probably shortcomings. Someone who really put a Yonder app through through some sort of accessibility testing device, I'm sure you would come up with ways that it doesn't, ways that it needs to be modified a little bit. But when I was working at the Harvard School of Public Health, there was a big emphasis on developing applications that met these accessibility standards, and it made me want a tool set that would allow for some deep flexibility, so that the applications we're building are accessible.
I'm glad you're mentioning this because I'll be honest, I don't think this gets enough attention in, well, I'm going to speak from the Shiny community standpoint. We should not lose sight of the fact that, yeah, these apps that we make may look extremely, polished, but if it's not accessible, then it may not help our intended use case. So I don't follow as much about kind of the bootstrap, developments as I probably should, but it's encouraging to see that now because of what Yonder is being based on Bootstrap for, that you're able to take some of those benefits and bring them to your Shiny apps because of that. So that's really exciting to hear about. We're getting some great questions online. We're going to get to them in a little bit. I wanted to make sure, Nathan, you had a chance to tell us maybe some of your plans for future development of Yonder in terms of like some bigger ideas that you're thinking about for the future.
Sure. Let me quickly highlight one last feature, because I think it touches on a utility many Shiny users. I think there's a use case for this feature, but because it's so absolute, many Shiny developers don't quite use it, and that is the submit button. And if you're newish to Shiny, you may actually never have heard of this feature, because it does feel a little counterintuitive to the Shiny reactive paradigm. And that is, if you build a Shiny application and you include a submit button, values are not automatically sent from the client back to the server. So your reactives don't update automatically until the submit button on your application page is clicked. And I saw a request, someone saying, well, could we have a scoped version of this submit button? That is, for example, when I change one selector somewhere on the page, that value is updated. But then if I'm working within this sort of frozen set of inputs, those inputs wouldn't be updated until the submit button is clicked.
Oh, this is really interesting. You got my attention right here for sure.
So this is actually another reactive input. It's not a very traditional one, but this here is a form input, and what it does is it freezes the inputs within it, and it will only pass on those values to the server when the submit button is clicked. So, for example, you can see I'll select those four, and nothing changed. Now, this value is outside of the form input, so it's not frozen. So there we see that the value is updated. We can change it back to Nate. But then if we hit submit, now we see those values are available on the server. And this can be very useful. So right now, we see there's one submit button, and when this submit button is clicked, the form input actually does have a value. It is the value associated with the clicked submit button.
Oh,
so
okay.
We could have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We maybe keep the max at 5. We could have any number of submit buttons associated with our form. So depending on which submit button is clicked, we can take a different action. So maybe we could generate a model versus test a model versus maybe just sort of, send the values for validation to the server first. So again, when I first saw submit buttons and Shiny, I thought, okay, that maybe I'll use that one day. But then I came across someone asking for this scoped version, and thought, okay, this sounds like an exciting, let's see if we can do this. And now that I have this scoped version, it's actually much more appealing to my development, because I don't, it's not just an absolute, oh, all the inputs on the page are frozen.
Well, I'm really glad you walked through this because a lot of my apps are going to have these kind of, logical sections of either textual inputs or whatever have you. But it'd be great to be able to do some customized processing on certain operations of taking that information and maybe doing one action versus another action. I can even see this being helpful with like data entry or data
Mm-hmm.
manipulation behind the scenes of like
Mm-hmm.
a database hosted on AWS or whatever have you. I could see lots of utility and taking advantage of this logical, like you said, this logical form control and being able to customize certain pieces to be more reactive than others. That's really interesting.
So okay. So now back to, sorry, I skipped I sort of derailed this a little bit, but when it comes to new features upcoming for Yonder, um, there is a big JavaScript overhaul on the horizon that will come with version 1.0.0. Right now, I'm still sort of in a beta, version 0, shall we say. And version 1, I'm very excited about this version because um, another motivation for Yonder was avoiding writing JavaScript, especially putting JavaScript in strings for your Shiny application. It's not something that you, a Shiny developer, may run into all the time, but there are instances where you do need to write some JavaScript. And if JavaScript is already sort of maybe a little tedious at times, putting it into a string and then having to write it that way gets even more tedious. And so this new upcoming feature is going to provide what I'm calling actions that you will write R code to tell an input what actions to take when certain values are clicked. And that could be when this value is clicked, show this nav pane. When this value is clicked, go update this other input without actually having to talk to the server. Now, in some cases, you definitely want that value to still get back to the server, but maybe in some cases you say, okay, just forward this value onto this other input so that we don't have to make the round trip back to the server.
Mm.
So that is still in development, and that but that will come out in 2020. Another feature that there are some exciting Shiny packages on the horizon. I don't really want to say more because I don't want to get myself in trouble. But I've made sort of an effort to kind of rein in some of the experimental styles that are included with Yonder. And so there's a big sort of CSS refresh on the horizon, and that will come with sort of the final version 0 of Yonder.
Oh, very interesting. I'll tell you, I was actually dealing with, what looked like a very ugly JavaScript snippet I had to put in an app I'm making for a new effort I'm going to launch hopefully early next year. And as a JavaScript novice, it was very difficult to get that to execute correctly. So anything you can do to make that friction less painful, I'm certainly appreciative of that for sure. Yeah, it sounds like a lot of great ideas on the horizon. I want to get to one of our questions because I think it's something I wanted to talk about too, is the fact that, um, a lot of us came to Yonder looking at, say, the GitHub repo, looking at some small examples in the package documentation. One of our
Mm-hmm.
listeners is asking, having an example Shiny app that showcases its capabilities would be helpful, because it's very hard to see from the website of the package. Why would someone want to be interested in using Yonder from that standpoint? So maybe you could give a comment about that.
Yes, I will be one of the first, if not the first, to say the website and documentation for Yonder could do a better job selling the package. And that is, I have sort of have some fingers crossed for the package down package, because it looks like there's some upcoming features which will help sort of post-process or post-process examples, so that if you have examples that produce HTML, they will render the HTML instead of, like, for example, if you go to the if you go to the Yonder documentation right now, you'll see the actual markup, the literal HTML tags that make up, say, a reactive input, when it would be much nicer to see the actual the generated input. There is a Yonder examples repo that is loosely based on the Shiny examples repo. And I'm in the process of overhauling that repository, because it's not quite a one-for-one take a Shiny example. It does this properly showcase Yonder. So I guess I don't have, I'm sorry to whoever asked that question. I'm sorry, I don't have I cannot point you in the direction of a great example right now. But I will say some of my work, some of my professional work on the horizon may be made public, and that when that is made public, I will absolutely, shall we say, tweet out like, hey, here is this application was built with Yonder. And so there are examples on the horizon. We'll make that a 2020 goal as well. Better examples.
Well, and I also hopefully this will help too. I again, one of the reasons I want to have this webinar with you is it's kind of a call to action a little bit, in that I would certainly hope, and I'm sure there are lots of Shiny developers out there that may have used Yonder once or twice or however many times. If you have feedback, please share that with all of us, and we would be able to, Nathan in particular, you'll greatly benefit from seeing whatever's
Oh yes,
in the Shiny community are doing with it. It's kind of like you're pretty sure there's traction out there, but what is it being used for? Sometimes it can be a black box, and this is not an issue that's selective just to Yonder. There can be lots of parts of Shiny itself, whether it's Shiny or just the extensions out there that are becoming quite popular. Sometimes we don't know how they're being used in the real world. We see like galleries, we see little things like that, but what are the problems it's trying to solve? And so this is where I hope that we'll get some examples. Obviously, of course, we'd love to have your examples, but others in the community as well to share that. That would be really interesting to see that. So I'm going to hit on another question that we got online. Going back to that navigation example that we were talking about earlier, our
sure.
listener asked if it was possible to hide that the links where it says go to set 1 or go to set 2, and let the boxes kind of be reactive by themselves.
That I would say is not best practice.
Okay, please elaborate on that.
Because for a first-time user, even though the cursor is changing here when we mouse over this card, I would bet 90% of first-time users are going to look for an actual link to click on. Now, they may not realize that this stretched feature is helping them out. For example, if I come over here and I think my cursor is close enough and I click, well, maybe it was. With the stretched link feature, it actually doesn't matter if I'm pixel perfect or not. So you're saving the user some headache they don't even realize they could have had. Now, an experienced user, if they're using your application again and again and again, I guarantee their muscle memory is going to find every shortcut out there, and they will then realize, oh, I can put my cursor right inside this card, click, boom, go, like, just step through the application. So again, you have to, this is just another challenge for Shiny developers, is you have to cater to a wide variety of users. So in this case, I would say leave the links there for users who need that visual cue. And then experienced users, it may not even register anymore that link is down there. I will also say you could put the link elsewhere. Maybe you can add some styling to maybe make this footer a little smaller, maybe make this text a little smaller. So there are ways to make this maybe less sort of impressive, but I would definitely say you want it there, and then let people find the shortcuts.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And also the fact that, like a lot of things in Shiny, if you have the technical knowledge, you can, make things look different however you see fit with, of course, the powers of CSS and all that UI magic that you can implement too. So the possibilities are almost endless. But I share your point. I think, yeah, that having that there is what most of the app users that I target would be expecting as well. So my another question from the listeners, and I'll kind of add my own spin on it too. They asked if it's possible to use Yonder with something like R Markdown, or any gotchas to have, say, Yonder be a front end to making an R Markdown report or incorporating Markdown into it. What are your thoughts on that?
That is a good question. I'm afraid I do not do enough R Markdown to definitively say Yonder can be used in X capacity. Again, because Yonder is building a Shiny app, you use Yonder to build a Shiny application. My gut reaction is, well, if it's appropriate for a Shiny application to work in that R Markdown document, and for some reason the Shiny application that Yonder produced doesn't work, that's a bug. That's on me. So yes, it should work in R Markdown, but should is a dangerous word. So if you happen to test that, again, please, if you happen to test out that feature, or you happen to use Yonder in R Markdown, it doesn't work, browse on over. Send me a hey, what's going on? And I'll
Absolutely.
be happy to strike up a conversation with you.
Yeah, this is exactly one of the themes I wanted to highlight too. And my take on this kind of question is the fact that we talked about it early on in our conversation, but Yonder, you're not expected to only use Yonder when you build an app with Yonder.
Mm-hmm.
There should be capacity to bring other widgets that maybe are some of your
Yep.
favorites, from user interface enhancements or what have you. And as you mentioned, if those are not working for whatever reason, this is the place you want people to go to let you know, and you'd be glad to look at that, it sounds like.
Yes, absolutely.
Very cool. Very cool. So yeah, I think we're gonna have to wrap up in a little bit here, but I'll let you speak about. Do you have any others kind of calls to action for our Shiny audience here in terms of what you hope they can get out of Yonder and what you hope to hear about Yonder usage that we haven't touched on already?
No, I think I'm a broken record at this point. It's mostly, if you have built an application with Yonder, please, uh, if you can make it public, please do so. Um, and if you haven't tried out Yonder, give it a whirl. Um, you know, I I try and regularly check the community sites, as well as Stack Overflow, for potential um, questions about Yonder, or even I'm still looking for issues that are related to Shiny that Yonder could tackle. Um, and I will say, for the sake of um, the demos today, I'm working in a different branch. So the master branch here is stable, and this is what you'll find on CRAN. So if you were hoping to replicate exactly some of sort of the appearance of this or this appearance, or maybe have this appearance, and you don't see it on the CRAN version, you can try out the V0 development branch. And otherwise, I just, a big motivation for Yonder, no surprise, it was you. It was how great the Shiny community is. I mean, the Shiny community is an extension of the already great R community, and it really is a pleasure to develop for people who are producing useful tools that I think are making a difference around the world. And I'm hoping to contribute to that community, and your feedback means that we can I can't this hopefully Yonder will actually help that community out.
Well said. I, as a consumer of many awesome utilities and packages that we've seen throughout this year, this is, again, no different in the sense that this is going to help my workflow. I can already see at least a couple use cases that this is going to be really helpful. And obviously, I hope others in the community feel the same, because we all benefit when we start integrating these great pieces together. So Nathan, if anyone of our listeners want to get in contact with you, whether it's about Yonder or other things, where should they head to?
You can, I believe I've got direct messages open on Twitter, and that is at Tweeter. So I guess I can spell that out here. So that's NTWEETOR at Tweeter. Feel free to send me an email at nathanteetor@gmail.com. That's TEETOR. And if you have sort of a package specific question, feel free to open an issue, open a pull request. And also, if you happen to be at our studio conference in, what is this, a month? Not that, if you're going to be at the next our studio conference 2020, I'll be there too. And hopefully we'll be putting together some Shiny related items or some meetups, and we can start a discussion there.
Well, you read my mind where I wanted to go with our last part of the conversation. Is yes, I'm going to be there too, and I would love to get in touch with. Well, first I want to have a little bit of reflection here. This has been an absolute thrill to be conducting this entire webinar series. Hopefully, those that have been listening from the beginning, or if you just listen to this episode, can tell that I am very enthusiastic, very excited whenever I get to talk about Shiny and the great community that's involved with it. And Nathan, you're a perfect example of that. And yes, I will be at our studio conference. In fact, I've been fortunate enough to have a poster session there, and I'm going to be highlighting a lot of the learnings that we've had from the Shiny Developer Series. And also, awesome. For those that are attending, please keep an eye out. I hear word that there are going to be Birds of a Feather sessions once again. And who knows, we might be able to do something with Shiny out there if we get together on that. So please stay tuned to the R Studio community portal. I'll definitely send tweet outs when I get more information, but I would love to interact with the audience on your usage of Shiny and what benefits that you have seen from the great packages, the great insights that we've had throughout the webinar series and beyond. So yeah, Nathan, I'll very much look forward to seeing you there in about a month or so. And for everyone listening online, we thank you again so much, especially for those that have been around from the beginning of this series. Curtis and I have been already starting our brainstorming on how we want to do this again next year, and feedback is more than welcome. Head to shinydevseries.com. You'll find a link to our contact page if you'd like to get in touch. And also, we will have a recording of this posted Probably very quickly, actually, because I will be off the grid after a couple days. So we'll make sure we get this recording out there and keep an eye out on the RStudio community portal. We'll have all the links that have been discussed during our talk with Nathan here, and I'll also have the recording posted on shinydevseries.com. So yes, we are right around our time allotted here. But again, my sincere thanks to everyone for joining us. Thank you, Nathan, for giving us this awesome overview of Yonder. I've already learned a lot of things that were kind of these aha moments that I love to have. And you already given me at least a few of those. So thank you for taking the time to come up with these great examples. And for those online, I hope you have a wonderful rest of the year. And for those that are attending our studio conference, I hope to be able to see you there and talk about all things R and Shiny and beyond. So until next year, 2020, this will wrap up the Shiny Developer Series for 2019. And we hope to see you next time. Thanks a lot for joining, everybody.